My name is Sabina, and I would like to welcome you to part 2 in our series on database marketing. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our presenters, Andy Pappas, who is our VP of Database Marketing and Analytics, and Tom Guernon, Director of Sales. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions pane on your right, and we'll be answering as many as we have time for towards the end. Everyone who is attending today will be receiving an email with a webinar recording by the end of the week, and we will also post it to our website. And with that, I'm handing over to our first presenter, Tom Guernon. Tom?
Thanks, Sabina, and thanks to everyone who's participating in today's call. I'm Tom, and I'm part of the business development role and team here at Relevate, and I focus on integrated marketing solutions. This is part 2 of a 3-part series covering database marketing, and what you're going to cover in the next 25 minutes or so will be a quick recap of part 1. We'll also look at where external data fits into database marketing, specifically from an analytic perspective. And for analytics, that term means different things to different people. So from a database marketing point of view, and for this call, it means describing what customers and prospects have in common, what makes them different. We're going to look at how to predict behaviors, like which people are likely to respond or likely to purchase, so that you can optimize costs. And we're also going to look at analytics in terms of reporting so you can measure results. Now, to view part 1 of this series, that webinar has been posted at relevategroup.com/learn. So you can go there anytime and pull it down. It's just a quick 30-minute video. But quickly recapping the highlights, database marketing is a process. So it's not a build a database and good things will happen. It's looking at data that you have, identifying data that actually means something to the business, and what data you can take action on. Taking action is the key. There's lots of talk now about big data, and just that you know that Jimmy bought a green toothbrush on Tuesday, that could mean something. But if it is meaningless and you can't take action on it, then what's the point? So it's about how the data is set up, how it's connected, how it's maintained, and also touching on reporting and using what is learned as a guide to marketing and business strategy. And finally, we shared some thoughts on what to look for when choosing a solution. So what is database marketing? Keep in mind a database is a tool. It's a collection of history of information that you've collected in the past, and it's the ability to look at that information and ask questions from that history. Now, database marketing, that's an approach. So it's about using knowledge you've gained to impact the present, and then also to predict the future with some degree of confidence. And in business, that degree of confidence is basically managing risk, right? And it's also about testing new ideas and learning from them. So part of the value proposition from a database marketing approach is expanding the user base and putting knowledge in the hands of the marketers. What I mean by that is instead of marketing being in the hands of coders or IT folks who control and query the data for you, it's in the hands of the people who are making marketing decisions and they're taking action, right? So it's getting closer to what you know. That's breaking down barriers. And from a scalability and performance standpoint, it's about being able to grow with the business and reducing delays and shortening lead times for taking action. On the lead times, it's not uncommon to break down activities that historically take a few days down to taking a few minutes, and that's time, which equals money. The next slide shows kind of a database marketing system, and this graphic does a good job of showing how everything comes together. Now, for today's call, we're specifically going to focus on the analytic piece. But working back from the top right, you have campaigns, and that's where most marketers are taking your action. Pushing out direct mail, how you're interacting with customers via the phone, email, or through your digital platforms. Then moving back to the left, we're really looking at the types of questions that you're asking before you take that action. So who are my customers? What are they worth? Where do they come from? And what channel should I use to reach them? Then you come back around to the right from the analytics standpoint. That's really about being able to answer those questions that come from the analytic capabilities and integrating that within the overall database marketing approach. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Andy Pappas. He's our Vice President of Analytics and Database Marketing, and he's going to share details on our marketing analytics with you. So Andy?
Thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, as Tom just mentioned, I'm Andy Pappas, and appreciate you joining us today on this call. For this session today, we're going to cover data enhancement, particularly for external data, the customer profile system, which we have an internal one we call smart profiling, predictive analytics or modeling, and then campaign attribution and reporting. We'll start today's discussion with data enhancement. Okay. We previously indicated that a database is a collection of information about customers and or prospects. This information can help you determine how to market and to whom. So what types of data are available to us and how can they be beneficial? External data usually comes in the form of things like demographics, such as age, income, marital status, home ownership, occupation, presence of children, etc., and lifestyle characteristics, hobbies and interests of people, such as do they like photography, travel, sports, reading, etc. You also might be able to find some general purchase behavior which is separate and apart from your company. Things like, do they purchase online versus offline? How many orders do they have for each channel? What are the dollar ranges for each channel? What categories do they buy from? Things of that nature. Also, you can have geo-based elements, which typically are going to be useful in model building. Right now, there's out there things like summarized credit statistics and summarized auto statistics that are rolled up to ZIP and ZIP4 levels that can be used in modeling efforts. Any and all of these external data elements can greatly increase your segmentation capability, thus allowing you to get more targeted. In addition to this, you obviously would have some internal data, self-reported information from your customers that may include the demographics or lifestyle characteristics, and you also would have the transactional histories that may point to certain buying preferences. Obviously included as part of this will be the RFM, or the recency frequency monetary information that can help you in your segmentation practices. Okay. With that, we'll move over to a brief overview of our customer profiling system that we call Smart Profiles. We offer a Smart Profile report package that provides a descriptive view of a customer base. In this process, the client would send us a representative sample of customers to be compared against national or regional distributions on a variable by variable basis using common demographic and lifestyle elements. The sample sent can be current customers, it can be buyers of a certain product line, buyers from a certain channel, past buyers, or any subset universe from your customer base that you'd like to profile. It typically will be a first step in trying to understand what the customer universe looks like. It also may act as a preliminary indicator as to how successful modeling efforts may become. The next slide is going to be an illustration of what one of the reports from a Smart Profile report package would look like. For this example, we're using income ranges and comparing the national household distribution of income against the client's customer base. The first column shows the various income ranges ranked from low to high. The second column shows a typical distribution of national households into these income ranges. For this example, there's 113 million households in total. The third column shows the percentage distribution of national households within the range. So for example, income range of E, 50,000 to 75,000, has 25.97% of the households, or almost 30 million households falling into that range. The fourth column shows the count distribution of the client file into these income ranges. So of the 65,000 client records that were provided, 18,700 fall in that same E, 50 to 75,000 range. The fifth column shows the percent distribution of customer households into these ranges. And the sixth column is the index calculation, which compares the customer percentage versus the national percentage for each row. An index of 100 indicates that the customer base mirrors that of the national universe for that particular value. An index less than 100 indicates an underrepresentation of the client file for that value, while an index greater than 100 indicates an overrepresentation. In this particular example, we see that the overrepresentation starts at 50,000 and actually increases as income increases. So we can conclude that this customer universe tends to skew towards higher income levels. This next slide shows us the same information but in bar graph format. Each bar represents the income level for the various income ranges from low to high as we move from left to right. We can clearly see here that the overrepresentation at the higher income levels exists. With our Smart Profile report package, similar reports would be created for 50+ variables, thus giving you an idea as to what they look like. But once again, we must note that the Smart Profile is just a descriptive view of the customer base, and it does not take into account the interaction of variables as a regression model would. Okay. We'll now move, we've seen what the profile process and its end result might be, and now we're going to move to the next logical phase, which is the predictive analytics. One may ask that if I get information about my customers from a profile, why would I need to use any models? Well, a marketer is trying to maximize customer performance, increase sales, and so forth. The best way to do this is by using past performance to predict future behavior. A model will take into account the interaction of data elements, which in combination will allow us to rank from high to low those people that are most likely to take a desired action. In other words, more sales. It's really a propensity to take an action. For example, the top group may be 2.5 times more likely to buy than average. It must be remembered that in modeling, there are no absolutes, just probabilities, propensities, and likelihoods, and we're trying to maximize that. Models can be created on current or past customers and or for prospects. Typical customer model applications can be for retention, reactivation of past customers, cross-sell to different product lines, overall lifetime value, etc. Acquisition models are typically there to increase response rates and getting more customers, more new customers at a faster pace. A great many of our clients are interested in generating new customers. As such, it is common for us to build acquisition models. When creating such a model, we typically take one of two approaches. We have the response model methodology, in which a client would provide us with a sample of solicitations and the corresponding responders. This gives us both those who took the action of response versus those that did not, or in other words, the good versus the bad. In the good customer match methodology, the client provides a sample of their best customers, so we have the positive actions, those who took a sale. We still need a sample of those that did not, and that can be extracted from our national consumer database. One thing to note is that the same methodology can be applied when building customer-based models. On this next slide, we're going to review the typical steps that occur during our modeling process. Initially, the client will provide us with the data sets. As we just saw, it could be solicitations and responses, or it could be a sample of good customers. Once we receive it, our production team goes through a few data preparation steps in order to standardize the data prior to data enhancement. We do this in order to maximize potential match rates. The next step would be taking the modeling data set and appending it with our modeling, with all the variables that go into it. In this case, we would have hundreds of variables, which include demographics, lifestyle characteristics, and the geo-based criteria we spoke of earlier. From this appended data set, we then would extract two samples. The first sample is going to be used to create the model, and the second data set is going to be used to validate the newly created model. The final step would be going back, taking this new model scorecard, and applying it against the entire data set that the client provided to us. This gives us an idea as to what would have happened had we been able to use this model at the beginning as part of the original selection. In other words, also known as a backcast analysis. We typically will run through the modeling process a few times until we get a combination of variables that produce a scorecard that is both strong and robust, one that gives us good lift and repeatable results. Once we have that, we produce a few reports and charts that can help explain. Here we are looking at a gains chart that shows the high to low ranking for the data set that was used to create the model. Column 1 is just simply the decile ranking of 1 through 10, in other words, 10% increments from high to low. Columns 2 and 3 represent the distribution of the total model creation universe amongst the 10 deciles and the corresponding percent of total, and again, in this case, 10% for each. Columns 4 and 5 show the distribution of the responses within each decile and the corresponding percent of total. You will notice that we have the highest percent of response in decile 1 and that it decreases as we go down the scale. That is what we would expect and we want to see. Column 6 shows the index for each decile being calculated as a comparison of percent of response versus percent of total in each row. An index of 100 will once again equate to expected response mirroring the average. Index levels above 100 are what we're looking for. Here, the highest decile has an index of 223, or put another way, 123% higher than average. In this particular chart, we see index levels above 100 for the top 4 deciles, with the 5th decile being approximately the same as average. Columns 7 through 9 show a cumulative number of responses, the cumulative percent, and the cumulative index level if you were to solicit records up until a particular level. So in this case, if we were to choose the top 4 deciles, which had the index of 100 plus, we could expect to generate overall response rates about 58% above normal, thus the index of 158. Okay. Once we've created the model scorecard, we then apply it to the validation data set. Recall, this will be the second extractive sample that we did during the process. The results of this validation scoring are shown on this gains chart. Here we are looking to see if we have not that we have the exact same index levels, but that they are close and that they're more importantly trending in the same way. In this chart, we see that happening, and you will note that once again, the top 4 deciles have index levels greater than 100, and their cumulative index is once again 150 plus. This next chart is designed to show the approximate lift in response versus total randomness at various levels of solicitation. The diagonal line that is shaded purple depicts total randomness. So 10% of the solicitations would expect to generate 10% of the response, 50% of solicitations should generate 50% of response, etc. The green line depicted as wizard shows what would happen if you were able to create a perfect model. That is the ability to generate all responses within a very small portion of the solicitation universe. This does not happen in the real world, however. The red curve, labeled as estimation, shows the lift in response using the first data set, the one that was creating the model. It visually depicts the lift as compared to total randomness. The blue curve, labeled as validation, shows the lift in response using the second data set, the validation group. The fact that these two curves are basically on top of each other confirm what we saw when looking at the two gains charts. Basically, that the model here provides lift in response and seems to be repeatable. Recall that earlier we indicated that there were hundreds of variables that are appended as part of the modeling process. Typically, the resulting scorecard may only have 15 to 25 variables that in combination provide the best lift. Oftentimes, incremental variables do not add strength to the model and may, in some cases, actually weaken it. In this example, we have about 15 variables that are part of the final scorecard. And in reality, the scorecard is just a mathematical formula that takes the weight of each variable along with the positive or negative impact to create a final score. In this model, age has the highest contribution, and within that, some ages will have positive points and some will have negative points. We also see that year of vehicle for their auto happens to be the lowest contributor, but it did make the final cut of variables in the scorecard. As you can see, the variables include other demographics and also some buying behavior indicators. So when scoring a data set, each individual will be assigned point values for each one of these variables, and ultimately will get a total score. The total score can then be ranked from high to low, of a high propensity to respond versus low propensity, and then can be broken out into segments, such as the 10% increments or deciles that we saw earlier. It can also be broken out into 1% or 5% increments as well. The final step to the modeling process is to run that final validation. Here we take the new scorecard that we just created and apply it against the total data sample we were provided at the beginning of the process. Recall up to this point, we've only taken out 2 random extracts. Here we will see similar trends to what we saw on the model creation and model validation data sets. Basically, the top 4 deciles individually produce index levels greater than 100. In this particular case, we would recommend that the client select records from the top deciles as an initial test, and we would also recommend them taking a random sample amongst all deciles just to validate their model results during a live solicitation. Okay. These previous few slides have reviewed the process involved and the end results when creating a custom model for a client. In addition to custom models, Relevate can also provide a generic segmentation tool called RPI, or Response Performance Indicator. RPI is a quick and easy, cost-efficient way that predicts general front-end response and likely back-end performance. The results provided actionable information on those that are likely to respond and also likely to pay. There are 10 segments associated with RPI, and unlike the decile rankings we saw in the gains charts with custom models, the 10 segments here allow a marketer to go up or down the scale based on the objectives and the type of client sought. We can't generally say that one ranking here is better than the other. It really depends on the client and the objective. Segment 1 typically has strong front-end response, but they also are more likely to have issues on the back end, such as bad debt or cancellation reasons. They may be appropriate for debt consolidation type offers. Segment 10 typically has lower front-end response, but they're much less likely to have any issues later on. They are much more appropriate for high-ticket or high-end offers. The next slide here is going to show us in a bar graph format the approximate distribution of U.S. households by the RPI segments. As you can see here, about 6% of the households will fall into segment 1, and about 5% fall into segment 10. The largest segment is number 4, with about 15 to 16% of households falling into this category. Segment 5 follows right behind it at about 13%. So approximately 30% of the U.S. households fall in the 4 and 5 classifications, and they might be categorized as Middle America. Once again, the RPI can be used for segmentation purposes. However, results generated from it would be far different than those expected from a custom model. So this really completes the discussion on profiling and modeling. So now we're going to turn our attention to campaign attribution and reporting. During our first database marketing webinar, we discussed the different types of common reports that are typically produced within a database environment. There are production reports that are typically created as the database information is being gathered and prepared, and they serve as a form of audit. These typically include all address hygiene report and merge purge reports. We also have the campaign creation reports, which help determine the segments and the criteria that will be used for selection and or suppression for all campaigns. There's campaign performance reports, which helps determine your actual response rates and performance and allows you to compare these results to original projections and can then also compare them to historical results. And finally, you have database performance reports with the key performance indicators for things like year-to-year comparisons, product category comparisons, segment comparisons, etc. Over the next few slides, we're really going to focus on the latter two, the campaign and database performance reports. Campaign reports can be either for online or offline campaigns. As it relates to online campaigns, you'll be looking to measure performance for opens, clicks, and if they click, which links were they clicking on, for bounces, complaints, and unsubscribes. Typically with online campaigns, you'll also be measuring results by the creative versions, where there might be differences in text copy or differences in images. You'll also be looking at subject lines, the day of deployment, the time of deployment. So is morning better than afternoon, or is evening better, is night better, etc. The next slide is an example of an email campaign performance report. In this example, we are looking at 2 creative versions along with 2 subject lines. Thus, there are a total of 4 versions being tested. The top third of this report summarizes the deliverability results. It shows us the total sent, total hard bounces, total soft bounces, and then the net delivered. In this particular example, we had just under 30,000 that were sent, and 95% of those were delivered. The middle third of the report summarizes the open and click activity, in other words, the positive engagement. We see the total number of people that open, 5,944, the open percentage, which is 20.8%. We also see that those 5,900 people went back and opened multiple times, as there were a total of 7,573 opens. Similarly, we can see the click results. 293 people clicked a total of 405 times. Thus, the click-to-open rate is about 5%. 5% of those that open click through to the various links. This middle section also shows that from an open perspective, creative version 1, subject line 2, in other words, the third row in the middle part there, performed the best. The bottom third of the report summarizes the complaint and unsubscribe activity, or the negative engagement. 232 people unsubscribed, thus no longer want to receive email from us, and an additional 17 complained, indicating that this was spam. They too would be suppressed from any future email efforts. As it relates to direct mail solicitations, each client may have different business rules in place that drive how the matchback process is executed. These business rules are combined with Relevate's matching algorithms to generate the campaign response universe. There are basically two main categories of match: the individual and or households that match, and then the incremental pass-along matches. And these are people or households responding that do not match a solicitor record on a name and address basis, but they do on a promotion code basis. And marketing departments usually will add these responses to the overall response metrics of the campaign performance. Once the matchback process completes, the performance can be measured using a variety of variables, individually or in combination. Typically, one would look at results by channel, by package or offer, by various price points, by any customer segmentation that occurred through the RFM practices, by list source, by model decile, by any of the appended demographic variables, or actually any other element that resides in the database. The knowledge gained from these results can be used to fine-tune future campaign efforts. Once again, we see that we're going to be using historical information to predict likely future behavior. In this next slide, we're going to be looking at the results for a direct mail campaign where there were 5 different packages being tested, package codes A through E. For each, we can see the total solicited quantity, total responders, and the response rate, along with net revenue. This client has also provided information for gross margin and associated costs that allow us to report back the total contribution to the business, and more importantly, the contribution per response. Using all this information, we can compare the 5 packages to each other and for the solicitation in total. This particular client has a very high ticket product line, thus the lower response rates. But looking at the report, we can ask ourselves, which of the 5 packages for this particular campaign performed best? Well, the answer to that question, it really depends on the measure used to define best. If we're looking at pure response alone, then package A did the best with the 0.26% response rate. However, if we're using contribution per response, then package C did the best with $866 contribution per responder. The next thing to notice on this report, below the totals row, is another row called pass-along totals. Again, these are the records that did not match during the name and address matchback process, but have been flagged as responses because they had the promotion codes that were associated to this particular campaign. In this example, they generated an additional $219,000 in net revenue and an additional $59,000 in margin and contribution. Because there are no additional costs tied to these pass-along response records, the margin and contribution remain the same. One thing to note is for purposes of this example, the pass-along calculations were not broken out by each of the 5 packages, but in a real-world example report, they would be. The overall campaign now has generated an additional $25 per response and contribution, going up to $590 from $565. This next slide represents a cumulative summary result from a number of campaigns over a given time period. The information is similar to that seen on the previous slide. That is, we have response, sales, and cost information that allows the important metrics to be calculated and reviewed. The left side of the chart shows the results using the normal matchback logic. There was a match at the person or household level. The middle part of the chart shows the incremental gains due to pass-along methodology. The right side of the chart shows the cumulative effect of both sets of matching logic. The important thing to note here is that by using the overall pass-along totals, there has been an increase in over $1 million in net revenue and an increase in over $300,000 in net contribution. In addition to campaign performance report, the database can provide information about the overall state of the business. Key performance indicators, or your KPI reports, can be created to review performance of product categories, customer segments, channels, seasonality, etc. The chart on the screen now is an example of a 3-year trend report by month. It can show us a couple of things. Obviously, it shows the number of items bought each month for the last 3 years. It also shows that there has been a growth pattern year to year. And it shows that their seasonality is similar in each year as it relates to the rises and falls in purchases. A marketer can use this information to help formulate the strategy for the upcoming year. For example, do we accept the fact that sales are lower in May, June, and July, or do we come up with some kind of strategy that can provide a lift in those traditionally slower months? This was just one example of a KPI report. The beauty of the database is that using data information that is available, you can generate actionable information that can help you develop future marketing strategies. With that, I'll turn it back to Tom Guernon, who will wrap things up.
Great, thanks, Andy. So what have we covered so far? So basically a recap of part 1 of the series, which is discussing database marketing as an approach. We've looked at how to use data enhancement to add insights and to expand your understanding of your customers and your prospects, and the different types of analytic approaches. So descriptive, predictive, and reporting. For the SMART profiling, that's an example of descriptive, and it paints a picture of what characteristics your customers or prospects have in common and how those characteristics compare to the overall population. From a predictive standpoint, it's ranking names by a likelihood of some predicted outcome. So what is that outcome? It could be propensity to respond, how likely they are to purchase. In some cases, are they going to return or be a bad debt? And as marketers use that information to get the most out of your budgets. So some marketers that we work with, they choose to stop mailing names that rank at the bottom of their model because there's no profits there in that group, and they pocket the savings. Others will take the savings that they achieve by not mailing the bottom, and they'll reinvest it at the top. So basically spend more time and more money and effort trying to reach the people who really matter from a profitability standpoint or response standpoint. And then some look at models and rankings and say, how do I develop products that speak to different segments within the model and try to take advantage or capitalize on any opportunity that may be there. Excuse me. Now, most marketers have to demonstrate the value they bring to their organizations on a daily basis, and some of the ideas that Andy showed on improving attribution back to your campaigns can be a quick way and a quick way of demonstrating ROI.